everybody, and welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by Projections, an IRI company. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit Projections online at projectionsinc.com and IRI at iriconsultants.com. I am Jennifer Oraqua, Director of Business Development for IRI, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. Over the last few years, human resources practitioners have experienced a deluge of emerging HR software developments, each designed to help us handle our new and disrupted normal. Keeping up with the latest HR software trends, especially in our current environment, can be a challenge. And so today I've asked Phil Strazzulla, founder of SelectSoftware Reviews, to talk with us. SelectSoftware Reviews, SSR, is a company that describes itself as HR tech nerds who spend all day long understanding the landscape of ATSs, payroll providers, employee software, AI, and much more. Thanks so much for joining me today on Project HR, Phil.
Thanks for having me.
So, I want to talk first about this recent boom in HR software development. So, what factors do you think have led to all of this innovation and the options that are now available to us?
So, there's a lot of factors that have led to the sort of general boom in B2B software. One is the how easy it is to build these pieces of software. So, you've got things like AWS, you've got developer tools like Twilio, SendGrid, Stripe, etc., that
Mhm.
mean that a really small team can now build really powerful software. What we've also seen is a massive adoption in these tools. So it used to be that a very small percentage of companies would have really even the basic stuff like HRIS, ATS, et cetera. The adoption has gone up, which means there's more dollars in this ecosystem, which means that the venture capitalists have come in and funded more and more companies, both in the sort of core HR sector as well as really powerful point solutions for anything from AI recruiting to diversity screening to you name it. And so this flywheel has gotten kicked off, and it's really a self fulfilling prophecy where the more innovation, the more customer adoption, the more revenue, the more value, the more dollars that come in, the more innovation, and on and on and on. So those are really the factors that have led to this boom.
So, it's kind of easy to get lost in a sea of alphabet soup when it comes to HR software. You and I were talking earlier about more than 30,000 solutions. So, I want to do a kind of a quick overview of the types of HR software that we're really talking about right now.
Sure. Yeah, it's extremely overwhelming. And on our site alone, we've got 100 different categories of software, let
Wow.
alone individual vendors. As you point out, 30,000 is the number. It's really amazing. I like to structure it in terms of the employee journey. So I think about the top of the hiring funnel, there's your employer brand. How are people understanding what it's like to work at your company? They're going on your career site. Maybe you use an ATS or a CRM or career site CMS to power that. You've got your applicant tracking system where you can actually take in applicants. You've got candidate screening tools. You've got onboarding software, compensation software, payroll, HRIS. You've got employee engagement and lots of different flavors of all of these sort of bigger buckets. If you think about it in terms of a framework like that, you can kind of start to understand, okay, there are solutions that touch each of these different pieces of the candidate journey. And maybe, and we'll talk about this in a bit, you start to think about what's the most relevant for you to start looking at.
So, of these categories, talking about that entire employee journey that you mentioned, where have you seen the greatest growth in software solutions over the last few years?
So, without a doubt, from sort of the great financial crisis through COVID starting in March 2020, we had a massive bull market in the US and really globally where unemployment was down to record levels. And so companies were focusing a lot on talent acquisition, applicant tracking systems, skills assessment, different sourcing tools. And because there was the adoption, go back to that flywheel again, we had more revenues there. And therefore, the VCs and the entrepreneurs said, hey, this is a great place to play. Let's start building next generation applicant tracking systems. Let's start building next generation sourcing technologies, et cetera.
Mm.
What happened during COVID was that one, everything shut down for 2 or 3 months. But then all of a sudden, people were like, we've got to do everything virtually now. We've got to hire people virtually. So video interviewing exploded, virtual career fairs exploded,
Mhm.
virtual onboarding, remote team building. Then everybody kind of figured out, hey, we've got all these people at home and they're depressed. They have anxiety. They've never had to manage their family life and work life together. Okay, let's do peer to peer recognition. Let's do employee mental health. We saw an explosion in the unicorns in these categories.
Mm.
And again, the flywheel. People adopted it, therefore the VCs got in and more companies got in there as well. Towards the end of COVID, what we've seen is a real focus on automation. So, how do we leverage artificial intelligence to source, screen, hire, answer questions, et cetera? Basically, again, all throughout the employee lifecycle. And that's probably the most interesting part of HR technology right now.
So I'm curious, in your opinion, do you think these new products have made HR more agile or productive, or have they just given us more choices?
I think that without a doubt, there's more choices, and
Hmm.
sometimes that leads to paralysis. I don't know if you've ever created a to do list with like 10 things on it in the beginning of the day. I usually don't get anything done. Whereas if I put, two things on it, then I'll get two things done and I'll
Hmm.
feel really productive. And maybe
For
I'll get to
sure.
those, three, four, five as sort of extra. So I think that without a doubt, it has made the ecosystem more intimidating and that if you're intimidated, you're going to make bad decisions, right? Like you're going
Hmm.
to buy an applicant tracking system through a vendor you already have a relationship with. Maybe somebody
Hmm.
does your payroll and they're like, hey, we've got an ATS. And you're like, okay, this is easy. Let's just use that. Most of the time, that's not the right decision to make. And so, yeah, a lot of this has led to either paralysis or the wrong decision making. However, when I look at really high performing companies, the fast growing technology businesses, the Fortune 500, many mid-sized companies as well, they're being super thoughtful. And now they have the ability to have a supercharged solution for something that is a pain point for their organization. The One of the things that I like to talk about is interview scheduling, which is like the super teeny tiny part of the employee lifecycle. But if interview scheduling is really important for your company, there are several tools on the market that are just like fantastic. Like
Mm.
they make sure that women candidates are going to meet with women interviewers. They give you real time coaching feedback to the people who are interviewing
Mm.
and the people who are doing the interviews as well. They will update calendars very quickly if somebody's sick or somebody has to reschedule. There's all these amazing things that they can do. And that's just one part of the employee life cycle that now you can get something that will really make your team superhuman.
Interesting. And you alluded to this a little while ago about historically human resources has been painted as slow to adopt new technology. And I know there's been a shift, but we're all in the people business. So what do you think's moved us to a place of greater acceptance of these software tools?
I think it's just a reality of a market where if you want to work at a great company in a leadership position, you need to adopt this technology or you're going to lose your job or you're not going to get promoted. You're going to stalemate in your career. And that's because there are a lot of people who maybe they grew up more with technology. They're a millennial. Maybe they're coming in from outside of HR. They were the head of marketing or they were the CFO. I've seen a lot of people from different parts of the org coming in and running people operations because it's exciting, it's challenging, and it's many times the most important part of an organization. And when the C suite and board sort of wakes up to that realization, they say, hey, we've got to get somebody in here who's amazing. And if the person who's in that job right now isn't amazing, we're going to get somebody from outside. And so I think a lot of people see that happening and they say, all right, it's time to upskill. It's time to understand how to leverage technology, data, et cetera, to drive us into the next phase of human resources slash people ops.
Perfect. Yeah. All right, Phil, I'm going to take a quick sponsorship break right now. But when we return, I want to talk more about the ways in which the right software solutions can impact our workplaces. So stay with us.
Your frontline leaders need skills and knowledge to support your organization's growth. They've got to motivate their team, support employees when they struggle, and connect with their people, all while continually improving their own skills. To help make your organization more successful, the A Better Leader team has created a free guide to selecting and educating your leaders. Before you hire another supervisor, before you give another merit-based promotion, read this practical guide. The 4 Qualities That Make Great Leaders provides practical tips on creating better leaders for your organization. The free guide also includes actionable steps on testing potential hires for these qualities during the hiring process so your supervisors have what they need from day one. Download this guide now at projectionsinc.com/abetterleader. You'll be glad you did.
I'm back with Phil Strazzulla, founder of SelectSoftware Reviews. Now, Phil, on SSR's website, your team tracks the most popular HR and recruiting software categories and updates that on a quarterly basis. So let's talk about that list as it stands at the time of this recording. Number one on that list right now are applicant tracking systems, which we talked about a minute ago. What advances have been made in this type of software of late? What should we be looking for if we're in the market for one?
There's a new breed of applicant tracking system. So 1999, the first cloud hosted ATS, iCIMS was born, and iCIMS is still around, one of the better sort of enterprise focused applicant tracking systems. And there was sort of a slow evolution from 99 through like 2010 with Lever and Greenhouse. People that were like, hey, all of these solutions are super clunky. Let's have a better UI and let's build out a more powerful ecosystem. I think Greenhouse was the first company that really looked at companies like Salesforce and what people are doing in other B2B enterprise spaces and said, let's copy that strategy. Right now, the best in class applicant tracking systems, one, they all look good. They're super easy. Whether you're a hiring manager, recruiter, candidate, you log in, you kind of understand what to do, even though there's a lot of stuff you can do
Hmm.
to customize it because these systems are really, really complicated, especially for big companies. Two, they have lots of integrations with all the tools you already use. So whether it's DocuSign or Indeed or an onboarding solution, they've got everything built into the platform so that you don't have to have a developer do anything. You don't have to have a spreadsheet where you upload every week or something crazy like that. So that's going to save you a lot of time. What they're also doing is smart things on the candidate journey. So, really beautiful mobile optimized career sites, talent pools, as well as internal optimization. So, a lot of the value from an ATS is making your recruiters more efficient. How do we do that? Well, it means that when somebody gets from one stage to the next, there's automatically a sequence that goes out with employer branding content, with next steps, with expectations for the candidates. If somebody gets rejected, they're automatically put into a talent pool where they're going to get nurture content over time so that they come back and apply and you can have a stronger employer brand. So it's just doing all this stuff that the best in class teams were doing manually, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, in an automated fashion, and allowing companies also to get a flavor for these tools without having to buy them. So a lot of them have free trials, a lot of them have self onboarding. If you're at a huge company, of course, that's just not going to be the case. You're going to run an RFP, you're going to go
Hmm.
through the whole, dog and pony show. But for a lot of these solutions, you can be a really good shopper and you don't have to buy it and implement it for 6 months and then realize it wasn't the right solution for you.
So I have the same question about the next categories on the SSR list. What advances have you seen in AI recruiting and HR chatbots?
So these are really interesting categories. AI recruiting, I think AI, like 6 years ago when I went to HR Tech in Vegas, which is, one of the big trade shows,
Hmm.
every single company was like, oh yeah, we're AI. And I don't know why like the word got out that that was like a good tagline, but it just like didn't really ring true and it wasn't true. Like if you demoed any of these solutions, you're like, oh, this is terrible. You're SMSing with a bot and it's a bot in the first message.
Right. Right.
The AI solutions now are actually really, really powerful. So I just saw a company, this is a 3-person company. It's not even a year old. They're well over $1 million of revenue. And they're basically replacing the staffing firms of their customers through an automated solution that will look at your open rec, will understand who you're looking for, will reach out to those candidates automatically. When they respond positively, they'll say, hey, hiring manager, here's a candidate. Are they good or bad? We'll rewrite. Usually they're right. If not, the algorithm learns. They'll put them on your calendar and they'll follow up with you. And it's
Wow.
like, that's amazing. Like that's
Yeah.
90% of what a recruiter does.
Right.
And companies like Lyft and I forget the other customers, but like it's legit businesses that are using this
Mhm.
at scale. So that's sort of been the evolution over the last 5 years. The chatbot is quite similar, actually. A lot of times people are deploying these for high volume recruiting. So speed wins and high volume recruiting.
Mhm.
Jobs are fairly commoditized. Somebody's applying for 10 jobs on Indeed, and one of them's a warehouse job, one of them's a call center, one of them's McDonald's. They're
Mhm.
looking for a job, healthcare, certain hourly rate, wage, etc. The way that you win there is you're really fast and you have a better candidate experience. So you can have a chatbot that texts somebody within 5 minutes. Mobile is the kind of the key there.
Mm.
Ask them the right knockout questions, gets them on a recruiter's calendar if they're a good fit, and you're good to go. The other way people are deploying chatbots is for employees who have the same questions over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm,
Like,
mm-hmm.
um, what are, I don't know, how do I do open enrollment? Like all these questions that drive HR insane or help desk insane. You can very easily train a chatbot to answer those questions with a
Mm-hmm.
really high degree of accuracy and completion. So that's what's going on in those categories. And I always liken it to an exoskeleton. The AI, the chatbots, really any of these tools are your exoskeleton, and they're allowing a recruiter, a hiring manager, whoever it is, to be 10 times faster, better, smarter.
Mm. Interesting. Interesting. I want to go back to something that you mentioned a little bit a while ago, which was video interviewing. So, what's new in this arena? There's got to be more to it than what we traditionally think of.
A lot of the newness is in simplicity. So there are many video interview solutions that have a free package, or you can get up and running in a couple of minutes. Versus, when HireVue started, they were literally sending people webcams, and even now, it's really an enterprise system that's designed to integrate with the Teleos, Workdays, things like that. So that's a big thing: is speed, integration, UI, the ability to pull out insights through artificial intelligence. There was a lot of controversy about this not too long ago because of the inherent bias that you find sometimes with AI based assessments. It really depends on what data set they're trained on. So, you might find that your AI is discounting what women or people of color
Mm.
or what have you say in an interview, which is obviously extremely, extremely bad for many reasons.
Mhm.
Um, and so, but that said, like some of these solutions, that the artificial intelligence is useful, especially when doing higher volume recruiting. And so that's really been the big thing there. And the demand was driven through COVID, and the demand has actually kept up. Like on our site, we saw a 500% spike first week of October or of April 2020 in for video interviewing, and it's trailed off a little bit. It's probably down 20 or 30% from there, but it's way up relative to pre-COVID, because most people are like, hey, this is a great way to
Mhm.
do our interview process. Why were we doing these in-person interviews in the first place? Because you're excluding a lot of people that way. People have to get childcare. People have to take a day off from work. It's
Mm.
just a lot of hassle that could be solved much more easily through technology.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And employee rewards and recognition also made this quarter's list, which I know a lot of us are like ho hum. But what are you seeing here? What should we be looking for in rewards and recognition?
So there's again this interesting next generation of rewards and recognition technologies that are really focused on peer-to-peer recognition, and they
Mm.
have a viral loop to them. So the most important metric for me when I evaluate these sorts of vendors is what percentage of employees log in on a monthly basis and actually use them. Because the historical solutions, it would be you log in on your birthday or your work anniversary when you get some sort of automated email that's like, hey,
Right.
congratulations, here's a
Right.
$5 Starbucks gift card.
Right.
The way they work now is, let's say you work at a company, you get recognized for you did a great job on a sales call, and you log in, and Debbie recognized you, and you're like, oh man, thank you so much, Debbie. And while I'm in here, Tom did a phenomenal job on that presentation last week, and so you recognize Tom, and then Tom logs in. It's sort of this like viral loop that
Mm-hmm.
happens.
Mm-hmm.
And if the UI is correct, if it's deployed through the apps that you're already using, like Slack, Teams, email, you're going to see 95+% of employees logging in on a monthly basis.
Hmm.
What's also happened that's somewhat of an innovation is that some of these companies are offering much more easily accessible rewards. So they have debit cards that you can use on gas. They also sometimes have these like big experiential rewards.
Hmm.
There was a company here in Boston called Drift that
Mm-hmm.
would do really big rewards for their employee referrals. So if
Mm-hmm.
you referred an engineer, I think they gave you like $10,000, but they gave it to you in a trip. And so what do you do when you're a millennial? You go on a trip, you put it on Instagram, and then
Mm-hmm.
your friend sees it and says, hey,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God, you went to Cairo? That's amazing. Oh yeah, my company paid for it. Your
Yeah.
company paid for it? What's it like to work there? Like
Yep.
it was
Yep.
this like really smart way of
Yeah.
their like re-kicking off that referral program. Um, so there's been a bunch of innovations, but I think that if you're looking at this sort of tool, which you really should, I think any company over 50 employees should have this, especially if you're
Hmm.
remote, and especially we're going through trying times in general with wars and all sorts of political
Mm-hmm.
stuff. You should be doing this stuff. And my number one piece of advice is just to understand the viral mechanics of the vendor you're looking at and the key metric of how many people actually go in this thing on a monthly basis. And it's 95+%. They're not going in because their manager's telling them to or HR's reminding them of it. They're going in because there's value.
Hmm. I love that, and I love that story about Drift. Drift is near and dear to our heart. We use it on our websites, and they are
Nice.
pros at making things visible. And I love that idea of making a positive positive impact by sharing those things virally. So, last on the most popular list are virtual career fairs, and these platforms have come sort of indispensable in light of COVID. Is that true?
They really have, and it's funny because it's something that, again, it's technology that's been around for a while and absolutely exploded during COVID. And we've seen it pull back, of course, relative to COVID levels, but it still is much elevated relative to pre-COVID. The basic idea here is that the same thing that would happen at a career fair, you're doing it virtually. So you invite a bunch of people to interact with your employees, with your recruiters. You can do really fast kind of speed dating interviews. You can answer questions. You can do speeches. And they're a great way, especially for high volume recruiting, or if you want to just expand your recruiting reach into different demographics, you can partner with organizations, you can partner with universities, clubs, etc., to get into different talent populations.
Excellent. All right, Phil, it's time for another quick break. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraqua, and my guest today is Phil Strazzulla, founder of SelectSoftware Reviews. I'm back, and Phil, I want to switch gears here. I want to talk about your company, SelectSoftware Reviews. What was your motivation to start SSR?
So I've always had this irrational desire to start businesses, despite the low sort of expected value, especially relative to my previous job as a VC. So that was a big driver. I had started an HR tech SaaS about 8 years ago, and then 5 years into it, I hired somebody to replace me on a day to day basis. And so
Hmm.
I wanted to start another business, and I love to learn. I love to teach what I've learned. I saw that there was an explosion in these tools. I saw that most HR teams were really struggling, even with the basics around what applicant tracking system to buy. I saw most of the advice online was bad, and some of it was
Mm-hmm.
bad on purpose and it was biased, and some of it was bad because it was just poorly researched. And so I thought, hey, could we make a business here? Could we basically figure out a way to do in-depth research, to share it in a way that's very consumable, actionable, and also make money off of it? And
Hmm.
it started as a side project, as many of these things do, iterated many times, and eventually it was like, oh, okay, like this is kind of how we do things. And now we've got 100,000 companies a month that use our research.
I love that. Yeah, and you were talking about how the different reviews. Yeah, I harken back to the story about Nike when they first Runner's World first reviewed the Nike shoes, and they were like, "This shoe's good, this shoe's bad," and rather it was, this shoe is right for this person, or this shoe is right for that person. And so
Yeah.
I feel a lot of that. So tell me a little bit about your research process.
Yeah, and you point out, you make a really good point, which is we have this list of the best applicant tracking systems or the best HRISs, and it's like these are what we think are the best, 15, but for you, you might be looking for the cheapest option. And so
Hmm.
your best is very different than somebody who's like, well, we're a global multinational and we need the best solution regardless of price,
Hmm.
etc. So to your question, what's our research process? We usually start with a extremely large list of vendors. We chop them down pretty quickly. So we have a rubric that looks at the financial profile of the business, the scale, the retention rate, the product, and we're looking for companies that are in the 85th plus percentile in their category. So there's 30,000 solutions out there. We have about 600 or 700 on our website that we feature, and we turn down a couple of companies per day, I would say. And we're nice about it. We're just like, hey, like here's what you need to do to be on one of these lists. We spend a lot of time talking to the vendors and doing demos. Many times we get to talk to the CEO, the head of product, head of marketing, and they are the experts. The head of marketing for an applicant tracking system knows more about ATSs than anybody else in the world, including us. They, of course, are biased. And so we also talk to who we think are some of the smarter practitioners. And we try to understand, hey, okay, especially consultants, what did you just look at in terms of applicant tracking systems last quarter for a client? What did you like about this one? What did you not like about this one? And we get a consensus. We also do look at the crowd review websites like Capterra and G2. It's hard to get a lot of signal many times because there's just so much content and you don't really understand who's writing these things. However, they can be valuable. And so we kind of mash all that up into a process that is fairly well documented internally. We select the best vendors and then we try to write a succinct but impactful review so that somebody can understand, when I'm looking for this sort of solution, should I talk to these guys? And when I do, what questions should I ask? And how should this be priced? What's a fair price for something like this? How do I get the budget from my boss? How do I get the buy-in? How do I think about ROI?
So all of your advice, all of this in-depth research and content is all offered free. Is that correct?
That's right.
So do vendors pay to be featured on your site? What's your revenue model?
We have advertising on our website. So the vast majority of vendors on our site are free. They're just on there because we think they're the best. And what we allow is if a vendor is featured on our site, there's a person who's totally separate from our editorial who manages vendor relationships. And that vendor can pay to have basically a better link on their site. So we might say, hey, here's the 10 best HR chatbots. We linked all of them, but somebody might pay us $200 a month to have a link to a landing page that's trackable, that sort of thing.
Perfect. Yeah. Because we all know we got to be hit between the eyes about 10 times with something before we actually take action. So that makes perfect sense. So tell me, where can I go to find out more about you or about Select Software Reviews? Where can we go?
Sure. So you go to SelectSoftwareReviews.com if you're looking at HR tech, or if you have like incurable insomnia and just want something that's really, really boring to put you to sleep. If you're not looking at HR tech, there's no other reason to go on our website.
Sure.
For myself personally, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only person in the world with my name, ZZL. I also have a blog, philstrazzulla.com, that I spend like 10 or 15% of my time investing. And so I write about a bunch of random finance topics.
Nice.
So yeah, reach out and connect anytime.
All right. The link to SSR's website will be included in this episode's companion guide. So I want to let our audience be sure to know to unlock that today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Phil, it is time for our lightning round questions. These are questions I ask of every guest of our podcast. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Our first question is always a topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about HR software trends. So as a self-described software nerd, this topic prompts the ultimate nerdy this or that question. In your opinion, which is better, Apple or Microsoft?
I'm going to go with Apple. I've been an Apple person since the 90s. I used to get Macworld magazine.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Yep.
When they came out with the G4 processor, that just sort of sealed the deal for me. And everybody used to make fun of me in school because it was like Apple, like nobody had an Apple back then.
Right.
But I was a diehard Mac person, and when I look around my office right now, I've got a MacBook Air, I've got an Apple Watch, iPhone, so I'm an Apple guy.
Me too. We're dating ourselves, but there you go. So tell me, Phil, what is the best book you've read recently?
I just read Influence by Cialdini, who is a really great marketing psychologist. The book is so good that Warren Buffett actually sent this guy Berkshire Hathaway stock. He'd never met him before, but he was like, your book has made me so much money, I want to just give you some stock. So it's all about human bias and super interesting. Yeah,
psychology persuasion. That's a really good one. Tell me, what's your favorite thing about the work that you do?
I'd really like to share knowledge. So when I get the chance to write or make a video or kind of just share something that I find is interesting or unique that I think a lot of other people don't know, it makes me feel good because I feel like I'm probably helping somebody out there make the right decision and maybe get promoted or help their business grow.
Nice. All right. What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
That's a really tough question. So in high school, I was a big wrestler, and I got to practice with this guy, Dan Gable, who's like a big Olympic hero and like the best coach of all time, and in maybe any sport. And he did a clinic at our high school, and he picked me to be his workout partner for the day, which is kind of cool. And he told me the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I think that's probably true.
I love that. That's a really good one. All right, last question. Who or what inspires you?
I would say my son. We have a 5-month-old, and I think that it just changes everything about your perspective. And for me now, whether I'm running on the treadmill or working late at night, his kind of face is kind of in the back of my mind, trying to make him proud.
Very nice. Phil, this has been such an insightful half hour. Thank you so much for joining me on Project HR.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I also want to thank our listeners. Don't forget that we listened back to this episode for you and took great notes, and you can grab those notes for free at projectionsinc.com/podcast. If you're ready for your Project HR debut, our team is always looking for outstanding guests. Let us know about your expertise at projecthr@iriconsultants.com. Don't forget to subscribe to Project HR. A new episode drops every Thursday. Finally, drop me a line, leave me a review, or give our show a handful of stars wherever you get your content. That's it for this episode of Project HR. Let's make it a great day at work.